One of the best tools that you can use to study English is podcasts. Of course, I have a podcast called the English Vocabulary Help Podcast. But if you're studying for TOEFL, IELTS, or any other English exam, you're going to want to study podcasts from native English speakers that are about a variety of topics. If you want the list of podcasts that I mentioned in today's video, you can use the link down below to subscribe to my email list, and I'll send you the list and I'll send you the link so that you can check out these podcasts on your own. I'm going to tell you guys my top 7 podcasts for English learners, so let's get started.
Instead of going to alert everyone else?
Victim loyalty is that behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's the case if like someone is injured, they may need that dog to just stay there and start barking instead of saying, hey, I'm going to run and find someone and let them know that you're not okay.
Right. However they alert, as long as they alert, that's good. That's the second part of the job. As long as they don't wander off and find a craps game to engage in without telling anybody that they found the person who's stranded in the wilderness, right?
Which would not happen with a STAR dog because they can focus like nobody's business.
Right.
The first podcast that I'll recommend to you is Stuff You Should Know. Josh and Chuck are the hosts of Stuff You Should Know, and they cover all sorts of topics from scientific topics to more true crime or murder. And you can learn a lot by listening to this podcast, but I also really enjoy it for English learners because their accents are super neutral American accents. And also, they just have a very calming way of speaking, so it's easy to listen to, and you'll learn all sorts of vocabulary and natural English phrases. In this clip that I just played you of the podcast, one of the speakers said, like nobody's business. So when we say this phrase, it means we do it really well, and you'll learn tons of different phrases just like this one from this podcast. So I highly recommend you check it out. And this particular clip was from an episode about search and rescue dogs, which I found interesting as well.
Raise your hand and be honest if you've used the phrase crazy busy to describe your day, your week, your month. I'm an emergency room doctor, and crazy busy is a phrase you will never hear me use. And after today, I hope you'll stop using it too. Here's why you cannot afford to use crazy to describe your busy. Because when we are in what I refer to as crazy busy mode, we are simply less capable of handling the busy. Here's what happens. Your stress hormones rise and stay there. Your executive function in the prefrontal cortex declines. That means your memory, your judgment, your impulse control deteriorate. And the brain areas for anger and anxiety are activated.
So you might have already heard about TED Talks. I recommend them to all of my English learners because they're really interesting ideas and there's so much content from the TED channel that you can listen to. In TED Talks Daily, which is their podcast, they share the most profound TED Talks. And if you didn't already know, TED stands for Technology, Education, and Design. You will get to listen to some really intelligent speakers when you listen to TED Talks. And the podcast is just listening to those TED Talks. So you'll get to hear a variety of different English speaking accents. And you'll get to hear from older English speakers, younger English speakers, or even English as a second language speakers. On the TED Talk Daily podcast, the TED Talk will be explained a little bit before you actually hear the speech, so it'll give you a little bit more context to help you understand the English. I definitely recommend TED Talks and the TED Talk Daily podcast to all of my students. I really think it's a great way to learn more academic English.
Like I will annex my kids' beds. I use the kitchen, the table that we eat on. I will use any surface that I could find.
Yeah, I read a quote from you in a People magazine piece from a couple of years ago where you were basically like, if it's too crowded, it's not because the space is too small. It's because we have too much stuff. So what is your first piece of advice for people who feel like this kitchen is too small? I've outgrown this kitchen, but they can't go anywhere. They're not going to be able to get a bigger space to work in.
I think just look at the stuff you're using the least. I don't mean not that much use because you only, deep fry once a year, but it's like the happiest day of the year. I wouldn't say get rid of your deep fryer, but stuff that's just not getting used. I always feel like there's stuff you can get rid of. There's a lot to be said for sort of minimizing things and figuring out ways to put things away in a cabinet where you can kind of see them. I have I don't even know. I have like 6 cabinets. And I think that's kind of pushing it. Maybe I have 4.
That's not very many. I don't think that's a lot of cabinets.
NPR is National Public Radio, and they make tons of really great podcasts here in the United States. I really enjoy this podcast, NPR's Life Kit. What Life Kit is, it's just different lessons to help you improve really random areas of your life. So the clip that I played you was from a podcast where they're talking about how to get more organized in your pantry. So like your food in your kitchen and things like that. I recently listened to an episode of NPR's Life Kit where the speaker was trying to tell you about how to wake up earlier and how to be better at waking up earlier. They also have interesting topics like how to start weightlifting. So these topics in this podcast are less academic and more real life topics that you could learn vocabulary from, and you would actually use this vocabulary in your conversations with your friends. So I highly recommend listening to NPR's Life Kit to learn English from.
And here at our radio show, we were talking about romantic comedies and how they don't get a lot of respect. I think it's maybe because the bad ones. Every part of them just feels too obvious, The couple meets, but they hate each other at first. They go through some things that make them, learn some important lesson about themselves. From the very beginning they're going to end up together, and then no surprise, they do. When it's not done well, it's all too obvious and tired, and you can feel the gears working in the thing. One of the producers on our show, Neil, he wholeheartedly really loves romantic comedies, has favorites that he's watched over and over dozens of times. He once collaborated with the producer of Sleepless in Seattle on a rom-com script that never got made.
This American Life is one of the most popular podcasts consistently in the United States. All of the speakers on the podcast usually have a very neutral Midwestern American accent, and it's hosted by Ira Glass. It's journalism, so it's teaching you things about the news, but they teach you things through people's stories. So if you don't have time to read a full audiobook, I'd recommend finding an episode of This American Life that really interests you, and you can learn English from native speakers and just find interesting stories by listening to the podcast.
I got up at 5:15 in the morning today because that's when the bus comes to pick you up.
And I do think that there is potentially an element of needing to understand that it's okay not to win. Like that can be part of coming across as a sore winner sometimes, is needing to win every time, or needing to feel like you did everything that you could to win. And if it isn't very important to everyone else, like there can be a little bit of a disconnection because everyone else is like, it doesn't really matter who wins at Foursquare, and you're like slamming the ball in somebody's face and saying, I did it.
The next podcast is Dear Hank and John. This is a really interesting podcast because if you don't already know who Hank Green is, you might know who John Green is. He's an author of Dear John and A Fault in Our Stars, which are 2 really popular romantic novels. Hank Green is his younger brother, and his content is a lot about scientific things and just really interesting things that you can learn. The podcast is really humorous because it's 2 brothers talking about just a wide variety of topics. So I think that you guys will find this one interesting, and if you're not already, make sure you follow Hank Green on TikTok because I really love the things that he teaches about on TikTok. They're just really interesting scientific lessons that you'll never learn in your school.
So up a bit. Next Fed meeting, last week of July. But let me back up here for a second, would you, to that whole slow the economy down thing. What that really means is to get consumers to spend less. Less consumer demand, prices stop going up, inflation backs off, and we are back to normal or close to it. One good proxy for consumer demand, in fact, maybe the best, retail sales, which we learned this morning fell in May 0.3% from the reading in April. Now, in normal economic times, that would be unwelcome news, right? I think we can all agree, though, that these are not normal economic times. And in point of fact, what we might have here is the classic silver lining.
If you are interested in learning about economics or you work with money and finance, I really recommend that you listen to the Marketplace podcast. I recommend this podcast for English learners that want to know more about economics and finance because the episodes are definitely shorter, so they're less input to take in each time you listen. And it's really simple. You definitely don't need an econ degree to understand what they're saying about the economy. It's like listening to a news summary of economics for the day in English. So check this one out if you're interested in finance and you also want to improve your English vocabulary in this domain.
Just tell me the day in advance and we'll figure out how to get them in our building. Because getting in and out of our building, Elizabeth, as you know, is a little bit of a, we don't have a doorman, so it's a little bit of a thing. So sure enough, they come and it's, I don't know how many people, at least 6, maybe 8, maybe 10, tons of equipment. Elizabeth, you can imagine what, lights and clips and stands and booms and all sorts of stuff. We just stayed out of their way. So anyway, so they come, they do the whole thing, they get everything out. And very politely and considerately, they left a card, like a thank you card, where they all had signed it. You know the way you do if you're in an office and everybody writes a little birthday message? So it's like, thank you for letting us use your apartment. So they did that. And the thing that cracked me up was somebody who said only, you had a lovely dimmer system. And it just cracked me up because we do have it. I love dimmers. I just like love dimmers. And when we moved into this apartment and when we did any renovations, I was like, let's put everything on dimmers.
The 7th and last podcast that I'm going to recommend to you today is from one of my favorite authors, Gretchen Rubin. If you like self-help books, I really recommend her books too. They're about habits and how to make your life happier by just adjusting to your personality type. In this podcast, she talks with her sister about things that make their lives happier, and the topics are just really interesting between two friends. You feel like you're kind of eavesdropping on two people talking just about various things in their lives. So check this one out too if you want to just hear casual English conversations. Thank you guys for watching this English video. I hope that you guys take the time to check out some of these podcasts that I've recommended in this lesson. I have a free PDF that you can subscribe to my mailing list for, and it will send you the links to the podcasts and it will send you just a quick summary of each one so that if you want to keep studying with these, you can go ahead and do that. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye.